speak to the Child Protection Reform and Other Legislation Amendment Bill. And at the outset, I too would like to acknowledge the contribution of foster carers and child safety staff in what is an incredibly thankless task at many times and an incredibly difficult task. I actually went through foster care training with my wife in 2018, and I was very confronted by the content that was presented in relation to the effect of trauma on physiological development around the brain. And not just that, it's every child in this situation, it is a tragedy. But what struck me was that those foster carers who make the decision to care for children in such a circumstance, they're making a considerable sacrifice as well. And it was a sacrifice that I wasn't prepared to make at that time, Deputy Speaker. The reason for that was because I felt that the position taken in relation to the rights of the child, and in particular the rights of their parents, was incompatible with my ability to be able to support that child in the same way that I support my own children. I wasn't prepared to enter into a situation where my children will be treated with one standard and a foster child who we were caring for will be treated to a different standard because their parent may have a different view, which is understandable, and I understand the desire to reunite young people with their parents regardless of the circumstance, but there has to be a point in time where the rights of the child comes first, and I appreciate and acknowledge that this bill seeks to do that. There needs to be a greater priority to protect all children in our society, and I acknowledge that it is a bipartisan position that that is a priority for governments, for the Labor government and also for the LNP. Unfortunately, we have seen too many cases of children becoming a forgotten number in a broken system. I won't talk about the individual cases because we've spoken about them time and time again in the House. But those kids need a voice. They need a chance. They need a chance to grow and to develop in a safe and loving environment, as most kids get the chance to do. And it's a tragedy, as I said, every single time that a child enters the foster care system, be it for a tragic circumstance like a car accident where both their parents may be deceased, or in instances where there is abuse in the family unit. I acknowledge there's a multitude of reasons why children may enter the foster care system and the child safety system in Queensland, but right across Australia. I support the amendments to the principles of the Child Protection Act, giving children a stronger voice in decisions that affect them for the reasons I spoke about earlier. But it's also vitally important that children are given appropriate support while they're using that voice. Too frequently, these children are discussing matters that are traumatic and stressful, and discussing them could be a cause of further harm, so it's important they get appropriate support. In relation to information sharing between departments and authorities, that's obviously critical in ensuring that we fix the child protection system. Unfortunately, we hear too frequently stories of antiquated processes in relation to the keeping of paper files, for example, and the inability of information to be transferred rapidly across departments, but also within the Department of Child Safety as well. And we need to ensure that the right people are looking after children in care, and also in our schools and in other entities across society. People need blue cards at the very least, in my view, and at the moment there's clearly deep concerns around the blue card process generally. We've seen, as others have spoken about, where victims of domestic violence have been misidentified as perpetrators, and domestic violence orders have been put in place, which can result in the refusal of blue cards frequently. Well, not frequently, but at times. And that, of course, will impact their employment opportunities. And I note the member for Gregory spoke about the unintended consequence, potentially, of people not reporting domestic violence in the home because they're concerned about the impact on the family breadwinner. Clearly, that's an outcome that no one in this House seeks to achieve, but we need to remove all of the barriers for victims of domestic violence seeking help. There needs to be a process where women or men who are seeking help from the authorities and gaining a DVO are able to do so, and we need to consider the second-order effects of some of these decisions. Information sharing between departments will break down barriers that have existed in the past, and it will open more doors for victims of domestic and family violence as well. And I'm pleased that this is a simple change to how things are currently done, and to be frank, it's disappointing that, and it's no reflection on the current government or the minister, but it's disappointing that it's taken until 2022 for these sort of measures to be in place. We've been in a situation where the information technology capabilities have existed for many years. We need to do better in this space, in my view. Our aim in this space must always be to protect children and women, particularly in violent and abusive relationships and situations. And I do acknowledge, Minister, that that is your first objective, and I know it's a thankless task at many times. I'd like to acknowledge your commitment to that, and also to the Shadow Minister. I find many, as I'm sure many in this House find, many of the situations that come across my desk as a Member of Parliament deeply confronting when you hear stories about children who are in abusive environments or in cases of neglect. And I live in a relatively affluent area, and I acknowledge the preponderance of that in my area is probably less than in some other parts of the state, particularly in some of our more remote communities across the state. And that's one of the reasons that my wife was so passionate about becoming a foster carer, because she was a police officer in the far north and had seen time and time again children who were in situations of neglect. I recall her telling me a story of entering into a house on a job in Cairns and about 10:30 at night, and there was a 1-year-old at home by himself, no one home, drug paraphernalia, etc. and so forth in the house. So that's not a situation that anyone should grow up in, and I'm sure that all members of the House want to see that sort of instance remediated, and we need to ensure that we work towards that without political interference getting in the road. In relation to the Working with Children Check National Reference System, the interstate information sharing is a no-brainer for me. Obviously, the recommendations from the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse should be implemented without delay, and states and territories should be working together on this. As I said, politics should be pushed aside. This issue is bigger than politics. On the Sunshine Coast, we've got some trailblazing organisations that are making a difference in the lives of women and children. Just last week, I attended a workshop tackling domestic and family violence, along with the member for Cooper and the member for Maroochydore, and we heard from advocates like Lloyd Clark, Hannah's father, and the grandfather to her 3 children, who we've heard about today, were all killed in horrific circumstances at the hands of a monster. And the work that organisations like those I met with last week on the Sunshine Coast are doing is invaluable. At the event, we heard from a cause which is close to my heart in DV SafePhone, and Ashton Wood founded that charity organisation. He's a Buderim resident, and they collect phones. They've collected so far 6,000 phones that get cleaned up, repaired, and then given to women in domestic violence situations so they can call for help and get themselves and their children to a place of safety. It's a tremendous organisation, and I was proud that my office was one of the first to start collecting phones for Ashton. It was born out of COVID after Ashton cleaned up his house and had a carload full of stuff to take to the op shop, and we had a lockdown, so he was left with a car full of stuff, didn't know where to put it. Rang up a police officer who works in the child safety space, and they said, "Look, mate, to be honest, we don't need all your old stuff from the house. That's nice, but what we really need is mobile phones." So Ashton made it his mission to set up this organisation, and they've now partnered with Lloyd and Sue Clark to ensure that their services are rolled out more broadly across Queensland and Australia. So if members of Parliament are of a mindset to do so, I'd encourage you all to set up your office as a DV SafePhone collection point. It's very simple. People just come in, drop a mobile phone off into the box, and you can drop them off at any Jeep dealership to get them back to DV SafePhone. Foster care services on the Sunshine Coast, like IFYS, are under extreme pressure, but yet our staff and carers continue to operate to protect our displaced children right across the coast. Across Queensland, we hear of children pleading to stay with their long-term foster carers, but too frequently, in my view, they are taken away from that situation and reunited with their family too frequently in unsafe situations. And that's why I think it's important that children deserve to have their voices heard. Their opinions and emotions need to be taken into account. I think we too frequently discount the views of young people in relation to some of these issues. My wife and I are proud parents of 4 young kids, and we know that they are very privileged to have every opportunity in life, but our kids are the lucky ones. And unfortunately, we need to ensure, as a state, as representatives of the state, that we do more to ensure that less children fall through the cracks in that regard. So anything we can do that reinforces children's rights in the legislative framework and to ensure that information sharing is streamlined and improves care for children, I'll support, because every child deserves a childhood, Mr Speaker, and a bright future.
Deputy Speaker.
Thank the member for Buderim. I call the member for Lytton.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker.